Estimating expenses in retirement can be very hard. After all, it's difficult for us to think about what retirement spending is going to look like while we're in the busy hustle and bustle of our day-to-day working lives. But estimating expenses accurately in retirement is a critical step. If we overestimate our expenses, it may run us the risk of delaying retirement or potentially leaving a large legacy to our loved ones, which wasn't intended. And if we underestimate, we run the risk of running out of money, which is most retirees' biggest fear. This is where things like rules of thumb can enter the picture. Rules of thumb that I often hear talked about by people that are planning for retirement as they relate to spending can be useful to get us into the mind frame of thinking about spending in retirement, but they could also be dangerous because ultimately estimating retirement spending should be a very individual decision, and fitting our retirement spending plan into a rule of thumb could end up with disappointment while we're actually retired. In this video, I'm going to talk about a couple of the biggest rules of thumb that I do hear passed around between retirees when I'm talking to them about retirement. I'm going to talk about what the limitations of those rules of thumb are, and then I'm going to share a framework that I use with people who are getting ready to retirement to help them accurately estimate what their expenses are going to be in retirement. And if we haven't met yet, my name is Mark Walhout. I run an investment advisory and financial planning business called Walhout Financial. I help people with retirement, and I created this channel to share ideas and concepts that I'm using to help people with retirement every day. If you want to get more videos like these, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you're alerted when new videos are posted. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and wait till the end of the video. I'm going to share some additional resources that tie into this video, as well as some work that I've been doing over the past year on a resource that I think will help you if you're thinking about retirement over the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully some of these things will help you as you move forward on that journey. So we'll start by talking about two of the most popular rules of thumb when it comes to estimating retirement expenses. I'm going to talk about what they are, and then I'm going to talk about the limitations of those different approaches to retirement spending. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to talk about the first rule of thumb, which is the aim to replace between 70% and 80% of your pre-retirement income. So if you're a couple that earns $200,000 per year pre-tax income before you retire, that means that you would aim to replace with your retirement income about $140,000 to $160,000 per year. And for a number of couples, for a lot of retirees, this will be a good number. But the problem with any rule of thumb is that it assumes that each different scenario is the same, and it sort of asks that retiree or that prospective retiree to fit into that box. And there are a number of different factors that might cause a 70 to 80% replacement rate to be inaccurate for a prospective retiree couple. The first one could be health issues. If there's a healthy couple, their needs may be very different than a couple that has some health issues, and they're going to need to pay more out-of-pocket healthcare expenses while they're retired. The second one is saving and consumption ratio. So picture this, a couple that earns $200,000 per year pre-tax before they retire. They've had a paid-off mortgage for a long time. Their consumption is actually very low, and their savings rate is incredibly high. Contrast that to another couple who has a very low savings rate and a high amount of consumption at the same amount of income as they approach retirement. To assume that their retirement spending needs are going to be the same just based on a simple ratio seems like a fairly dangerous assumption to make about retirement spending. And then the third one is family dynamics. There could be unique dependency situations for a prospective retiree couple, potentially children that they still provide support to, or parents. Family dynamics do come into play, which make a rule of thumb estimating retirement spending based on pre-retiree percentages or pre-retirement income percentages a bit of a dangerous assumption to make. The second big assumption or rule of thumb that I see when people are thinking about planning for retirement is assuming that retirement spending is going to fit three distinct phases. The first is the go-go years of retirement. The second is the slow-go years of retirement. And the third is the no-go years of retirement. And what this means is that in the early phase of your retirement, when you're healthy and active, that your spending is going to be much higher, and then it's going to drop at a specific point, usually at the 10-year mark, to sort of this middle phase of retirement where you're still enjoying some leisure activities, consumption does drop, and then finally the no-go years of retirement where you're not very mobile and discretionary spending has basically fallen off a cliff. And I drew this little picture at the bottom to sort of illustrate what this means. And the danger that I find with this approach, number one, it assumes that everybody's arc of health and appetite for active living is going to be exactly the same as they move through their retirement years. And the joke that I like to make to people when I talk about this particular rule is I don't want to be the planner that has to tell you the year that the calendar flips over from December 31st to January 1st that your spending needs to go down by $10,000 a year because, sorry, you've now exited the go-go years and now you're in the slow-go years. or conversely, that we're in the slow-go years, now we got to move to the no-go years. I don't think this is how people actually plan out their retirement spending. I don't think this is how people actually plan to consume their retirement dollars in retirement. So I think that using these rules of thumb, while they can be helpful as a starting point to have us think about what spending might look like in retirement, I think these are dangerous assumptions to jump to as we're building out an actual retirement plan that we're going to implement in practice. Now, the best approach, of course, for modeling out spending in retirement is to do it in a way that is unique and specific to you. Now, I'm going to share a method that I use with people when I walk them through spending in retirement, and feel free to use it for yourself. So first, we start with what I like to call just a simple visioning exercise. And this is one where I ask a lot of questions. And what we're trying to do is sort of establish a vision for what that retirement span is going to look like. And here's sort of how I approach it. Depending on when that retiree couple, when you'd like to retire, we start with that date and we simply talk about how do we see that first 5 years of retirement going? What are we doing in that first 5 years? What does a successful start to retirement look like? What are we doing? Who are we with? What are the things that we're worried about that we want to make sure that we mitigate against? And we talk about that first 5 years. And as much as you can sort of trim down these time intervals, the better. Then we'll sort of expand that to the next 5 years. And we'll kind of say in that same discussion, how do we see the next 5 years being different from that first 5 years? What are we doing? Who are we with? What are we worried about? What do we want to protect against? What has to happen in that first 5 years? And then in that next 5 years for us to deem that our retirement is a success. And then from there, we'll move out to longer time periods. I find that the first 10 years, it's probably somewhat easier to articulate or think about what we envision for that first decade of retirement. Once we get into sort of those longer time frames, it can be harder for us to be specific. But as short as those intervals can get, I do encourage you to think of it this way. But then we'll move to that sort of next decade of retirement, and we'll talk about, how do you see your life going? Who are you with? What are you doing? What kind of activities are you engaged in? What are you worried about? How do you see life changing as you enter sort of that next period of your retirement life? And then we'll sort of keep going through the decades. And in this discussion, I will take that conversation all the way to age 100. And sometimes people they look at me funny when I say, let's talk about the years between 90 to 100. And they sort of say, I don't know if we need to talk about that, Mark. I don't know if we're going to be here from 90 to 100. But the reality is that if you're a healthy person, if you're a healthy couple right now entering retirement, with how much advancements are constantly happening with healthcare, I think it's very likely that a lot of retirees and even retiree couples are going to be hitting that sort of mid-90s, almost 100 mark. We need to recognize that and acknowledge that as we go through the planning process. So as I sort of build out my diagram here, I put this sort of downward arrow. This is a process. This might not even occur over the course of one meeting. It's a process of discussion. And only once we've sort of articulated that vision for that retirement period, so 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, or even now we're going to get into 10-year periods, only then can we start to sort of put pen to paper and actually perform some of the tactics to figure out what each of these different spending areas is going to look like. Now, I use a spreadsheet. It's a simple spreadsheet, and I'm going to link to it in the comment section below. There's a link there where you can get the spreadsheet. It's yours. I welcome you to have it and use it for yourself. There's 35 individual line items in the spreadsheet, but it falls broadly into a few key categories where we talk about or estimate spending needs or spending categories that include housing, food, transportation, leisure and entertainment, healthcare, travel. I didn't mark that in here, but travel would be part of leisure, I suppose. And then finally, legacy. So money that is earmarked for goals. Legacy could also include giving, so giving while we're alive. Those are really the key areas in that spending spreadsheet that we want to capture. And now we sort of have a blueprint. We need to now figure out how we're going to go ahead and provide the income that's going to support these needs throughout those different periods in retirement. Now, I talked about the rule of thumb of go-go, slow-go, no-go phases in retirement, that rule of thumb that often is passed around. And my thinking here is that it is likely, in fact, that there's going to be portions of your spending that do decline as you move through retirement. But my issue with that rule of thumb is that I don't like to take it as sort of like an assumption going in the door that at a certain point in our retirement journey that we're going to drop expenses off of the plan. And the way that I encourage you to think about this is only remove things in your plan sort of in that second or third decade if you know certainly that you're not going to have an appetite, a desire, or a need to consume those things in retirement. If you still see yourself traveling in that second or third decade of retirement, I encourage you to leave travel in your retirement budget. We won't know until we get to that date what our appetite's going to be for that type of consumption. I think it sort of puts us at a disadvantage. It puts us in a bad place if we make the assumption right off the top that we're going to, all of a sudden when we turn age 75, our travel budget is going to be cut in half and we're going to be okay with that. I think that's a dangerous assumption to make, and it might have us make some bad assumptions going in the door what we think retirement's going to look like. So I'd like to be as specific as possible. And what I want to say here is that let's only drop things off of our spending plan if we know certainly that we're not going to want or need to have them as we sort of move through those different phases of retirement. And we'll close with talking about some research that was done by David Blanchett of Morningstar, where he talks about the consumption of retirees and the pattern that consumption in retirement actually takes. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll show that visual. But what he shows here is that spending in retirement, instead of looking sort of like a step down process, like we talked about, where spending in retirement sort of drops down at sort of these hard intervals at certain decade points. What he shows is that retirement consumption actually follows more of the path of a smile. And it's been referred to after the fact as sort of the retirement spending smile. Is that at the beginning of retirement, spending sort of starts at a certain level. As retirement progresses, that spending in a real sense, so inflation adjusted spending, even though nominal spending may remain somewhat similar, in inflation adjusted terms, spending actually declines in the middle portion of retirement. And then it goes on to increase later in retirement. The second thing that he noted in his research is that at higher levels of consumption, that inflation adjusted decline in real spending was actually more pronounced. So people that had more consumption, they saw a larger real decline in their spending. So there's a couple things that I think we can draw from that. The first is that the more money you have, the more consumption that you have, the more that your actual spending can decline, because the necessities of life are a portion of your budget, but maybe they don't comprise the vast majority of your budget. So there might be more room to reduce discretionary spending for somebody who is starting at a point where they're consuming more in retirement. The second thing that we note is that spending increases at the tail end of retirement. And what can we draw from that? And why is that the case? At least in the United States, spending increases near the end of retirement because healthcare spending increases. Now, the United States is a completely different healthcare system than Canada, so it's not exactly reasonable to draw exact parallels to the experience of US retirees and Canadian retirees. There are things in the Canadian healthcare system that are going to be provided and paid for through public health programs that are not going to be covered in the United States. But there are still expenses later in life that retirees should provision for as it relates to maintaining their health, things like prescriptions, medical devices, and things that may not be covered by provincial healthcare plans. So it is reasonable to expect that there could be an increased cost of healthcare for Canadian retirees as they enter retirement. But the big takeaway here is that that spending pattern doesn't follow sort of an abrupt drop at certain given points in retirement. It kind of follows more of an arc, or we can maybe assume that it'll follow more of an arc if the research that comes out of the United States can be seen as parallel, or Canadian retirees can expect a parallel experience for their retirement here in Canada. So hopefully you found this video to be helpful. I'm going to close the video talking about some resources that I've been working on over the past year. It's always been in the show notes of this show, but there's one thing that I haven't actually proactively mentioned on the channel in a video. I do publish a weekly newsletter. It goes out every Friday at 4 p.m. And the format of the newsletter is fairly straightforward. There's a video with me talking about topics that are of interest to retirees that happen to come up during the week, either through conversations that I'm having with clients or from articles, industry newsletters that I'm reading, articles that are published. There's a lot of really great financial planning writers in Canada, financial planners who also write and are producing content. I like to talk about things that I see and read that I'm finding to be helpful and that I'm sharing with clients. And so the format is sort of a 5 or 6 minute video with me sort of talking about here's what's new this week and here's what I saw that I think might be of interest. It includes some links that you might find useful. And I send that out, as I said, every Friday at 4 p.m. So if you're interested in sort of receiving that communication from me, you can sign up below. You can unsubscribe at any time. The other resources that I'll include in the show notes below, first is a link to the spreadsheet that I'm happy to share with you that you can use to estimate your retirement spending. Finally, there's a how much do I need to retire link where you can fill out a short quiz, and then I send you a personalized and private video that sort of answers some of your retirement questions, talks about sort of roughly what you should expect in terms of your needs for retirement, and gives you some things to think about. Obviously, taking the jump to meeting with a planner might be a big step. So this is sort of an intermediate step for you to maybe hear from me personally, give you some sort of high level pointers about retirement. And a lot of people have remarked back to me that they found that to be a very helpful step with them in their planning, and it's kind of given them a nice boost as they move towards more specific planning for their retirement. So thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you're alerted when new videos are posted. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll speak with you soon. Take care.